Hello everyone, my name is David McMurdo and welcome to my channel where I reveal the spiritual in everything. Subscribe because I upload new content every single day either here on my YouTube channel or on my Patreon account. I'm here to spread the very essential message of experiential spirituality, which is nothing less than the mystic message itself. And if you want to help me do that, then you can support me on Patreon for £5 or more a month, for which you will gain access to my ever-growing Patreon blog, and for which you will receive a copy of my book, Experiential Spirituality, The Mystic Answer to Everything, in PDF format. Thank you very much to those of you that already support me on Patreon, because without you, this kind of content would just not be possible. Does prayer work? It's a very important question that's been asked since the beginning of time. Unfortunately, modern debates on the issue tend to be very misguided because both sides in such debates are usually operating on the same erroneous assumption. That erroneous assumption being that praying is tantamount to making a wish. In other words, their erroneous assumption is that prayer is fundamentally about asking things of God. That is simply not true. Prayer is actually about communing with God. And therefore, the answer to the question, does prayer work, is yes. Prayer works for the same reason that meditation works. It works because you benefit from the mere act of engaging in it. I often describe prayer as talking to God and meditation as listening to God. And you will benefit from talking to God in the same way that you will benefit from listening to God. So yes, prayer does work. Now, it is true that throughout the sacred texts of the world you will find examples of individuals asking things of God. Requests can certainly be, and often are, a part of prayer, but we need to take a closer look at that, because I think many souls in the world today, if they were to ask things of God, they would typically be material things. Perhaps they would ask for a new car or more money or something like that. But if we look at the sacred texts of the world, those are not the kind of requests that individuals within those texts make of God. So let's narrow our search down to just the New Testament here. Let's think about what is undoubtedly the most profound and probably best known prayer from the New Testament, specifically the Gospels. Namely, when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before his arrest, crucifixion, and ultimate death. We see that in that prayer, Jesus is struggling with his flesh. He has an egoic identity, as we all do. He has a personhood. And in his personhood, he does not want to die. He does not want to go and be crucified. No one would. However, he also knows that it's the will of God that he go to the cross. And so, in Gethsemane, he is praying for spiritual strength that will enable him to submit himself to the will of God, as opposed to surrendering to his fleshly desires. And that is characteristic of the kind of prayer you find throughout the sacred texts of the world. In other words, prayers within the sacred texts of the world tend to be for spiritual gifts, not for material gain. If we look at the Apostle James, for example, he specifically mentions requesting wisdom from God in prayer. He also says that the one that does not believe in God should not expect to receive anything. And this is why I made my video on faith before I made this video on prayer in this playlist, because you have to understand faith if you're going to properly understand prayer. Likewise, the book of Hebrews says that those who ask things of God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of those that diligently seek him. You must have faith in God before you can reasonably expect your prayers to be answered. And if you're going to make requests in prayer, the best requests you can make are those concerning spiritual gifts. Now, some of you may be thinking about a specific line in the Lord's Prayer, specifically where Yeshua teaches his disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." But before we get to that, I want to point out that immediately before Jesus teaches the disciples the Lord's Prayer, he says something interesting to them. He says, God already knows what you need before you ask him. It's important to point that out because many materialists in the modern day, they think they're being terribly clever by pointing out that, hey, what's the point of asking an all-knowing being for anything? Doesn't that all-knowing being know everything anyway? And that question can actually confound a lot of theists. They don't know how to respond to it. And the reason they don't know how to respond to that objection to prayer is because they don't understand what I said earlier, that the primary purpose of prayer is not about asking things of God, it's simply about communing with God. One thing you can be assured of in every area of spirituality is that if God requests us to do something, then it's not for his benefit, it's for our benefit. God does not need anything from us. The same is true of prayer. Of course, God knows what we might ask in prayer, but we ask anyway because it's not fundamentally about letting God know something that we want in prayer, because God knows that already. It's fundamentally about the act of communing, because as I said earlier, we benefit from the mere act of communing. And so we ask things of God, even though, of course, God already knows what we're going to ask, because it benefits us to do so. And as I say in the book, there are some things that you simply cannot obtain or achieve in this world without asking them in prayer. And that's just the way it is. No matter how much material effort you put in, no matter how much intellectual effort you put in, you still will not receive those things unless you ask them, because God wants us to commune with him, and yes, he does want us to ask things of him, even though it's not the primary purpose of prayer. Now, when we look at the Lord's Prayer specifically, you will see requests that are made to God within that prayer, such as, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. And you might think, well, David, that's perfectly in line with what you've said already, because those are certainly spiritual requests, but what about this line, give us this day our daily bread? Is that not a material request? Is Jesus there not teaching his disciples to essentially ask for food each day? The answer is no. The word that is translated as daily there is actually a unique word that is not found anywhere else, and what it actually properly translates to is supernatural, or even more accurately, something like supersubstantial. So what that line is actually saying is, give us this day our supersubstantial bread. And this use of bread as a metaphor for spiritual sustenance is used throughout the Gospels. For example, in the Gospel of John, Yeshua even compares himself to the bread that came down out of heaven. And of course, he wasn't intending there to convey the idea that he was a loaf of bread that came from heaven. He was there intending to convey the idea that he himself was spiritual sustenance. This is why elsewhere he talked about individuals eating his flesh and drinking his blood, because he was using himself as a metaphor for spiritual sustenance. Now, this may sound very strange to you, because for most of you, for your entire life, you've heard this line, give us this day our daily bread, and you've took it to mean actual physical bread, actual material food. And so you may think that what I'm telling you here is some fringe idea that only a few people agree with. That is actually not the case at all. The majority of scholars fully agree with what I'm saying here. Not only that, what I'm saying here is actually recognized within the Catholic Church, for example. So this is not some fringe idea. This is something that has been recognized for a long time, but it just hasn't made its way into popular consciousness yet. It tends to be the reserve of academics or others who really delve deeply into that matter. So yes, even in the Lord's Prayer, the requests that Jesus teaches the disciples to make of God, every single last one of them is a spiritual request. Look at the resurrection of Lazarus. There could not be a more spiritual request than to return the soul of Lazarus to his physical body. Now understand that I'm not saying here that you should never ask things, material things of God in prayer. Your prayer, your interactions with God are yours, and I would never dare to tell anyone the way they should pray to God. If you want to ask God for material things, that's your business. That's between you and God. What I'm simply pointing out is that in the sacred texts of the world, contrary to what most would think, the prayers, the requests made in prayer, they are for spiritual gifts. They are for things like wisdom, temperance, patience. things that are in many ways unselfish gifts, because if you become wiser, if you become more temperate, then you are able to benefit others around you. So if you're going to make requests of God in prayer, it is far superior to ask for spiritual gifts like that, things that will, yes, benefit you, but ultimately benefit others as well. I mean, it's very obvious that the most unselfish prayers are the best prayers to give. Actually, as I say in the book, the highest thing you can do in prayer, bearing in mind that prayer is fundamentally not about asking things of God, it's about communing with God, talking to God. The highest thing you can do in prayer, quite simply, is to express gratitude to God. That's the best thing you can do in prayer. That is the thing in prayer that will benefit you the most. And the great thing about experiential spirituality, aka genuine spirituality, is that all these things can be put to the test. Why not go and pray to God right now? And instead of asking anything from Him, just simply thank Him for everything that you have. If you had a really good upbringing, thank Him for that. Thank Him for your circumstances. Even thank Him for those things that caused you suffering because of the lessons that they taught you. Just try being grateful to God in prayer. Try expressing nothing but gratitude to God in prayer. And I guarantee that you will stand up from that prayer feeling a whole lot better. But remember what I've always said. Don't say something to God and then stand up and walk away before He can respond. Once you've made your prayers to God, sit there in meditation for a time, just listening. Because it's like I always say, you wouldn't walk up to someone in the street, say something, and then walk away before they had a chance to respond. That would be obnoxious. The same is true when you approach God. Don't say what you want to say to God and then walk away before God has had a chance to respond. Say what you've got to say, express your gratitude, and sit there in silence. Let your internal phenomenon be the emotions, thoughts, and even disturbances in the outside world. Let them be as they may. Don't let them drag your attention away, but don't try fighting them either. Just let them be and listen in the silence for God's response to your prayers. And you will stand up from that session feeling very refreshed. But the important takeaway from this video, and something that will ultimately transform your understanding of prayer, and something that will shed light on the misunderstanding surrounding prayer that so many souls have, the important thing is that prayer is really not tantamount to making a wish. Prayer is fundamentally about communing with God. Sometimes a really positive, useful, productive prayer session, all it has to involve is you telling God about your day. Now, does God know about your day already? Of course He does. That's not the point. The point is that you benefit from the mere act of speaking to God. So I believe I've belabored this point hard enough in this video. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. Like the video, leave a comment, and I will see you tomorrow.